to tell you a little bit. Thank you, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our awesome project scholar, Miss Alonna Carter-Donaldson. Alonna Carter-Donaldson is a public historian and a freelance writer with an interest in African American genealogy and history. Her work has been seen in the New Pittsburgh Courier, the Soul Pit Quarterly, and Public Source. In 2018, she was named an honoree for the New Pittsburgh Courier Fab 40 Under 40. Ms. Carter-Donaldson also serves as the historian of the Edna B. McKenzie branch of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In 2021, she was selected as the inaugural Burke Family Research Fellow at the Frick Pittsburgh for her work on African Americans in Pittsburgh's Gilded Age. She is currently the project scholar for the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium, intersection of race and disability project. In addition to her professional work, she is a member of the National Council on Public History, the African American Intellectual History Society, the Oral History Association, the American Historical Association, and the Association for African American Museums. Ms. Carter-Donaldson holds a Bachelor of Arts from Carlow University in Philosophy and History with a concentration in pre-law and a Master of Professional Writing degree from Chatham University. She is expected to receive a Master of Arts in Public History from Duquesne University in 2023. It is my honor to welcome Alonna Carter-Donaldson.
Good afternoon, everyone. A little bit. Thank you, Dania, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank everybody in attendance as well on our virtual stream for coming to a conversation about the intersection of race and disability project. So I'm gonna back my slide up here a little bit. So I'm honored today to give you an overview of this very important project and introduce you to 5 trailblazers from Western Pennsylvania who have lived at the intersection of race and disability. And on this slide that we're seeing now, there is the logo of the WPDHAC in the shape of the state of Pennsylvania on a white, yellow, and blue background. So before I get into the project, I want to share a little about the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium. The WPDHAC was founded in 2015 and is a community-based archive that preserves and honors the historic struggle of people with disabilities to attain human and civil rights and shares the lived experiences of today to promote community access, participation, and equal opportunity. Partners for the consortium are, of course, the Senator John Heinz History Center, the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, and Achieva, who's their fiscal sponsor. Funders are the PA Developmental Disabilities Council, FISA Foundation, the A.W. Mellon Foundation, and several other donors who donate $40,000 annually. The WPDHAC also has a steering committee that includes individuals. Again, the Senator John Heinz History Center, the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, Achieva, Community Living and Support Services, known as CLASS, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, Southwestern PA, known as NAMI, Inside Our Minds, Peel Center, Pennsylvania History Coalition, Honoring People with Disability, Polk State Center, Transitional Paths to Independent Living, known as TRIPLE, and Disability Options Network. And we are once again very happy to have our partner FISA. And we're here today in part due to their support. And Christy, who was up here earlier, gave us the mission of FISA. And if you're unfamiliar with it, it is to champion equity, justice, safety, and inclusion for women, girls, and people with disabilities, combating systemic racism that impedes progress for those populations in southwestern PA. So to begin talking about the intersection of race and disability, I thought it would be best to give some data to paint a picture that often escapes conversations concerning BIPOCs, specifically African Americans who live at the intersection of race and disability. So over 6 million African Americans in the United States live with a disability of some kind. And according to a 2020 report from the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics, Black Americans experience higher rates of disability compared to other races, and they're employed at a rate of 20.5% compared to 31.3% for people of other races. So we can already see there's a big disparity there. In education, Black or African American students with disabilities are more likely to receive disciplinary removal than all students with disabilities. And the last piece of this data is so important in the wake of social justice movements related to police shootings in the last few years. About 30 to 50% of all people killed by law enforcement officers are disabled, according to the Ruderman Family Foundation. Given these statistics, we can see how race and disability intersect at vital areas and critical areas of life every day for African Americans. So in this slide, there's a magnifying glass with a question mark inside the lens on a blue background. Given these statistics that I just shared with you, where are the stories? That's what advocate and activist Melissa Thompson wanted to know when she coined the hashtag #DisabilityTooWhite. Thompson, who's a Black woman with a disability, created the hashtag when she came across a Twitter conversation that discussed an article on disability and beauty. Another advocate named Alice Wong suggested that the article left out women of color. And in responding to Wong's comment, Thompson was inspired to coin hashtag #DisabilityTooWhite because while BIPOCs represent a large part of the disability community, their stories and experiences are often untold and overlooked. With this observation, the WPDHAC sought a grant from FISA to engage a project to document a shared history of the Western Pennsylvanians who live at the intersection of race and disability, to expand the historical record and advance equity and disability rights. Through this effort, we hope the project will contribute to the systemic change throughout community engagement that explicitly connects this history to the contemporary struggle for racial equality, civil rights, and social justice, and supports advocacy for equitable policy and practices. Through this project, we explored the following questions. What do we need to know about people of color who live at the intersection of race and disability? How have people of color led efforts to establish disability rights? How has race affected access to treatment or services? And how have people faced interpersonal and systemic racism and ableism? We were very lucky to have our partner, the Heinz History Center, serve as a model for undertaking this work, as they have done work on several exceptional individuals, such as Herb Douglas Sr., who was the first person to successfully use a seeing eye dog. And on the slide, we do have a photo of Herb Douglas Sr. With his seeing eye dog that I was able to pull from the 1967 issue of Ebony magazine. And the picture shows, again, him seated. And he was also the father of the famed Pittsburgh native and Olympian, Herb Douglas Jr. To make sure that we're executing this project with precision, a timeline was developed. And the project began in January of 2022. We met twice with an advisory panel constructed of individuals who work with organizations active in the disability community and who also live at the intersection of race and disability to strategize and get input on how to approach the process. Through January through May of this year, I researched and documented the stories of our inaugural class, and we have 5 stories. I did a combination of archival research using collections like the Heinz History Center, the University of Pittsburgh Special Archives and Collections, and visited the Carnegie Library and other archival repositories and conducted and recorded interviews with the subjects and those who knew them. In May, we had our first presentation on the project at the Envision Conference, hosted by the Western Pennsylvania School for the Blind. And in June, we circled back with our advisory committee, provided updates, and got a little bit of an evaluation. In July, we had our second presentation on the project at the Pitt Diversity and Inclusion Forum. And from July all the way through this month, I've been writing the stories in article form, and we have begun rolling them out on those 5 figures from our inaugural class right on our WPDHAC website. We will finish the project in December with the final story, and then the executive committee of the WPDHAC will evaluate it. And as I mentioned, there's been quite a process in approaching a project and seeing it on its way to completion. It entailed me doing a ton of research, creating short biographies on each of the potential subjects, collaborating with the advisory committee to create selection criteria, and then actually diving in and conducting those oral history interviews. Beyond that, I've been tasked with reaching out to various modes of media to disseminate the info and promote the stories, and of course, sharing with audiences just like this one. And I'm proud to say that we have remained on target through this process. We encourage you, if you're not signed up for the WPDHAC newsletter or on their website for updates, to go in there and sign up, and I'll give that information towards the end of the presentation today, and view the 3 stories that have been posted to date. Process aside, I now have the honor of introducing you to the inaugural class of the Intersection of Race and Disability Project. And we are so happy to have our first interviewee, Miss Florence Reed, who is here today. And she is the co-founder of Working Women with Disabilities, known as 3WD. Ms. Reed graduated from Miners College, which is now known as the University of the District of Columbia, with a degree in speech therapy. She later enrolled in the University of Pittsburgh, where she received her master's degree in counseling education. Ms. Reed taught in the Pittsburgh Public Schools for 7 years and is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Reed acquired a disability as an adult, but she had already been well acquainted with many people working in the disability community through her previous work in speech therapy and counseling. Ms. Reed noticed that the presence of minorities were rare when she began to collaborate with her colleagues. And then she also noticed that she was now dealing with 3 parts of her identity that made her subject to discriminatory practices: being Black, being a woman, and being disabled. So in the 1990s, she and her friend, Randy Rubin, came together to set up meetings where women with disabilities could talk about the issues they faced in the workforce. Ms. Reed and Ms. Rubin would officially found Working Women with Disabilities in 2000 and create a mission to provide employment support and education for all women with disabilities. The organization also did fundraisers to help women with disabilities with rent, food, and resources. On this next slide, there's a newspaper clipping from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette of when 3WD sponsored the Linda A. Dickerson dinner in 2004. And many of you may have known Linda A. Dickerson. If you did not know her, she was a disability advocate and a Carnegie Mellon University trustee, and she passed away in 2020. Through perseverance in addressing a void needed to be filled for women in the disability community, Florence Reed has affected the lives of many people across Western Pennsylvania with her work. Her advocacy and persistence have set the stage for a new generation of advocates who are navigating intersectional challenges. And Ms. Florence, I just want to say I really enjoyed our interview and our conversation. And I gained so much insight, not just on what it means to be an African-American woman living at the intersection of race and disability, but also what it means to truly be a social justice advocate for equality. So I want to thank you for that. And I also wanted to share one of the quotes, my favorite quotes from our conversation. Ms. Florence said, "Know who you are, what you want, and what has to be done, and how you're going to go out. And the best thing I can tell anyone," she said them, but anyone, "is there's a saying, walk softly and carry a big stick." Thank you, Ms. Florence. We should give her a round of applause. I got really emotional because she's an inspiration, and she doesn't always think that. So I'm going to continue. So next, I would like to introduce Marika Moore and Rika's Hearts. And on this slide, there's two pictures. There's a picture of Marika Moore at the top right, and then at the bottom right, there's a picture of a group participating in one of the annual family fun run and walks for epilepsy. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that in a moment. Rika's Hearts was founded in 2013 by Mr. and Mrs. Moore, Ron and Cicely Moore, after their daughter Marika had double brain surgery. The Moores were overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from their community in Washington, PA, when Marika was in the hospital, and they decided that they wanted to give back to their community. They founded Rika's Hearts to raise money for Marika's medical treatment and also to raise money for members of their community for needs spanning from medical treatment to even supporting youth sports. One of the ways in which they raised money is by organizing an annual family fun run and walk for epilepsy. The Moores would eventually also like to establish a scholarship fund to send children from Washington, PA to college if they would like to attend college. And I was hoping that they would actually be here today to talk more about their organization, but I'm happy to provide information at the end of the presentation for anybody who wants to learn more. And on the next slide, I just wanted to give you some perspective on the intersectionality of African Americans living with epilepsy. So according to the CDC, there are about 3.4 million Americans who live with African Americans who live with, 3.4 million Americans who live with epilepsy, and about 578,000 African Americans suffer from this illness. According to the Epilepsy Foundation, African Americans are more likely than their white counterparts to be diagnosed and are more likely to experience medical emergencies related to epilepsy. With medical emergencies come mounting hospital bills, and we do not always hear about the struggles that come with trying to pay for those bills, and how a diagnosis of epilepsy can change both the quality of life for an individual as well as the quality of life for their family. Rika's Hearts brings visibility to what self and community empowerment looks like. And again, I'm sorry that they couldn't be here today, but they are an amazing family with an amazing organization. So we're still going to clap for them as well. And I encourage you to go out on, again, the WPDHAC website to read the story that was published. So I want you all to just take a moment to imagine post-Civil War Pittsburgh in 1868. Many of the things that we know and love about our city don't exist yet, including integrated schools and places of worship, even though Pittsburgh was a staunchly abolitionist city. Imagine now the lack of resources that there were during this time for someone who was deaf. What I just described to you was what this young man, Henry Collins Bell, experienced. And on this slide, we have a picture of Henry, courtesy of the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. He is standing in a pose, dressed in clothing from the late 19th century. And Henry C. Bell was the first student of the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. He was born in 1862 to Martha Caroline and Robert W. Bell. He was a resident of the Hill District and later the South Side. And one day in 1868, Henry showed up with a friend who was German to the Third Presbyterian Church, which was then located in downtown Pittsburgh, to attend Sunday school. This was an all-white Sunday school. And of course, Henry, being a young Black boy, caught the attention of the school administrator, Joel Kerr. According to sources like the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Pittsburgh Daily Post, Kerr was willing to let Henry stay, although it was a white school, and he went to talk to him. And he didn't know that Henry is deaf, so Henry didn't respond. Thinking that the young boy might cause trouble, the teacher inquired why Henry was not at the Black Sabbath school next door. And Henry's friend explained that Henry was deaf and he couldn't learn anything there, and also that the Black school had turned him away. Mr. Kerr allowed Henry to stay until Henry's motor communication through facial expressions caused the other children in class to laugh. And seeing Henry as disruptive, Kerr dismissed the child. But Henry, at the tender age of 6, would not be deterred. And he came back through a classroom window the next Sunday. And this cycle will repeat. Kerr would let him stay, and then when he felt Henry was being disruptive, he would send him home. But Henry came back every time. Impressed by Henry's persistence and through the insistence of another teacher, the Sabbath school hired a teacher who was deaf by the name of William Drum, who then asked the school to find more deaf children to be taught. Henry excelled in Drum's classes, learning to sign his name and the alphabet in 27 lessons. And he excelled despite white mothers threatening to take their children out of class because they did not want their child to be taught alongside an African-American boy. He excelled and he graduated. In 1880, he became a wire drawer, which is a person who makes wire by drawing an iron rod through holes, and then eventually moved to Wellsville, Ohio, where he worked as a barber. He would also marry in 1892, though his wife's name has been lost to history. But sadly, he died the same year, just 2 weeks after getting married at the age of 19. So while Henry's story, it seems it was short, it may have come to a tragic end, it wasn't. He did so many things in his young life. And on this next slide, I actually have 2 articles that I located in the Deaf Mute Journal, which was a journal that was published in New York, I believe from the 19th century up all the way up into the 1940s is what it was called. And these mention Henry after he graduated from the WPSD. And I know that the writing is kind of small, so summarize kind of what they both say. So one from 1892 describes him visiting Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and mentions his occupation as a barber. The second from December 8, 1892 tells of Henry's death. And it also calls for a plaque to be placed in memorial at the WPSD. I do not know if there's a plaque there. I have not had a chance to visit. I know that they do display the photograph that I showed you very prominently in one of the main halls. But Henry's self-advocacy not only opened the door for the creation of the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, but for other individuals of color in the deaf and hard of hearing communities. For his story, I had the chance to speak with advocate, activist, and Pittsburgh resident, Brandy Lee. And I asked her how, first of all, what her idea of the story was. And she, of course, was very inspired by it, and she didn't know about it. A lot of people don't know about this story. And I also asked her how social justice organizations and other areas could partner with those in the disability community better. And one thing she said was, to quote, "Bring us to the table, but also allow us to speak." And I thought that was a fitting quote for Henry's story, because from the very moment he was brought to the Sabbath Day School, his presence spoke volumes, such that it affected a much needed change and prompted the creation of a much needed organization. So if you didn't know about the first student of the WPSD, you do now. And I highly recommend that you share his story. Next up is someone that I think a lot of people here may know. This is Milton Skip Henderson. And we have a picture of him sitting at, I believe, an ADA event, ADA anniversary event. And many of you here may have known Skip through his work with the Pittsburgh Allegheny County Task Force on Disabilities, the statewide Independent Living Council, or from the Three Rivers Center for Independent Living. Milton, or Skip, as many people call him, was a resident of the Hill District and attended Brashear High School and the Community College of Allegheny County. Skip was paralyzed in a car accident and became active in the organizations I previously mentioned. In interviewing Dustin Gibson, a former friend and colleague of Milton Henderson, I learned that Skip had a passion for activism and that he never hesitated to call out injustices when he saw them. Gibson recalled when the two were working for Three Rivers Center for Independent Living, known as Trickle. One day he and Skip were having a conversation about how inaccessible sidewalks had become when restaurants began putting tables and chairs out for sidewalk dining. Gibson quoted Skip as saying, quote, "We had to fight to get on the sidewalks. Now we have to fight to get down them." In addition, when I asked Gibson about the word he would use to describe Skip, he said, "resistant." And looking at his career and advocacy work, Skip Henderson resisted the limitations that are often placed on people in the disability community. He also resisted status quo by being active in community spaces that were predominantly white. And he openly spoke of his experiences as a Black man living at the intersection of race and disability. Sadly, Mr. Henderson passed away suddenly in 2019. His passing shocked both his community and colleagues. However, his legacy as an advocate is still in the hearts of many. And on this next slide, I have a picture of Mr. Henderson from an article entitled "Disabled Have It Rough Getting Around" from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in 2001. The picture shows Mr. Henderson being lifted into a van to be taken to an appointment. And in this article, he talks about how severe the issue with accessibility to transportation was. I'm still actively researching his story, but I do hope very soon I'll be able to share more of his story, his work as an advocate, and his activism in an upcoming article. And last but certainly not least, our fifth subject is Marilyn McKinney. And on this slide, I have two pictures of Marilyn given to me graciously by her son, Brian, who is attending with us virtually. Miss McKinney was raised in Detroit and was a resident of the Stanton Heights neighborhood in Pittsburgh. Her work with the Pittsburgh Public Schools included ensuring PPS was compliant with the regulations of the Individuals with Disabilities Act, known as IDEA, when it was first rolled out in the 90s. She was also a branch secretary for the Pittsburgh NAACP until her death in 2004, and served as the president of the Greater Pittsburgh Alliance of Black School Educators. Ms. McKinney's daughter, Ebony, was diagnosed with lupus at an early age and was granted a wish by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And seeing that most of the children participating and selected in the program were not children of color, Ms. McKinney founded a group called African Americans for Make-A-Wish. According to an article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which reported her death, African Americans for Make-A-Wish's goal was to, quote, locate children who might qualify to have a wish granted, anyone younger than 18 with a life-threatening illness. And when I think about Ms. McKinney, sometimes we forget about the parents in the story who have led the charge to make a better future for their children. Ms. McKinney's passion rose out of the desire to make sure that all children had the same opportunity that her daughter did. Her son, Brian, put it profoundly. He says, quote, there were other kids that weren't going to be okay, and not just Black kids in the district, but also those with special needs as well. She gave all of herself to that point where she really didn't have much energy for anything else. But she knew that, and I knew that, and we all knew that. Her cause was much more than just being a great mom to my family, but being an advocate, a leader, and a leader for the kids that needed one. And on this next slide, I have a proclamation that was given to Ms. McKinney by the Allegheny County Council shortly before her death in 2004. And it's a testament to how much she was respected for her work. I was honored to interview both Brian and Ms. McKinney's close friend and colleague, Ellen Esteman, who each gave me their take on her legacy. Brian says, quote, to me, it's an idea. You never stop fighting for the community. And she knew that there was so much more work to do. And if she was going to go out, she was going to go out doing something that she loved. And she was going to go out helping the community because that's what she did for 30 years of her career. So I think it's just that you never stop giving back to the community. There's always more work to do. And Ellen Esteban stated the following. Her legacy is that she really wanted to see the Black community succeed. I think that's her legacy. I think she wanted the Black community to be seen as people with dreams and people with hopes, and people who wanted economic success, and people who wanted to be able to go to college or to a trade school to become whatever it is they want to do. So this is the inaugural class of the Intersection of Race and Disability Project. And I'll read their names again. Florence Reed, Rikus Hartz, Henry Bell, Milton Henderson, and Marilyn McKinney. We definitely need to give those who are here now their flowers now. So just keep that in mind. If you see an advocate who is making change, give them their flowers now. So all of the people we have just learned about have made an impact on Western Pennsylvania through their advocacy and commitment to creating change. Now I want to talk about some of the social justice themes that we explored throughout these stories. On this slide is an image that has a group of words in them, such as justice, freedom, health, dignity, equality, and human, arranged in a wordle with assorted colors. In engaging this research and hearing the stories, there were a few social justice themes that were uncovered. They were education, access to affordable medical treatment, and non-discrimination in the workplace and disability employment, and transportation rights. When we talk about social justice, we must remember the roots of many of the movements are heavily embedded in the civil rights legislation of the 1950s and 1960s. On this slide, I have a black and white photo of Thurgood Marshall, George E.C. Hayes, and James Narbutt Jr. standing in front of the Supreme Court after their victory in the historic case of Brown versus Board of Education. Brown v. Board was a catalyst. The ruling in the case of Brown versus Board dismantled school segregation, deeming it unconstitutional. And while the case was brought to the courts to challenge the segregated schooling of Black children, Brown would set the precedent for legislation like the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which addressed the protections for students with disabilities. Section 504 of the Act is a federal law designed to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities in programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance from the department. Brown also gave way to the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, which was established in 1990. IDEA, as it's called, is a law that makes available a free and appropriate education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation and ensures special education and related services to those children. When we're looking at disability employment, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 laid the foundation to make it unlawful to discriminate against individuals in the workplace based upon their federally protected class. On this slide at the top left, there is a black and white photo of Martin Luther King Jr. and President Lyndon B. Johnson at the signing of the act in 1964. And on the left of this next slide, there's a picture of another civil rights icon, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, speaking with activist and advocate Justin Dart Jr. And one could argue that the provisions of the Civil Rights Act gave birth to Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as ADA. Title I reads, employment prohibits covered employers from discriminating against people with disabilities in all employment-related activities, including hiring, pay, benefits, firing, and promotions. Covered employers include private businesses, educational institutions, employment agencies, labor organizations, and state and local government entities with 15 or more employees. Other acts that followed in the footsteps of civil rights era legislation would be Part 37 when we're thinking about Mr. Henderson's story of Part 37 of the Transportation Services for Individuals with Disabilities Act, which states that reasonable accommodations must be provided on public transportation for individuals with disabilities as a provision of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And this means that things like chair lifts, adequate spacing for wheelchairs and other medically necessary equipment, clear signage and braille for those with vision impairment, and proper audio accommodations must be readily available in public transportation. All of this legislation pertaining to disability rights that we just visited was created by previous social justice movements to address and remediate civil rights. Knowing the history, the impact that these movements had on subsequent legislation should deepen our awareness to the unsung histories who were active in fighting for these causes. It should also allow us to recognize that partnerships are valuable tools, and when used with the best interests of all, they can create lasting and effective change. Partnerships and collaborations are what is needed to transform legislation, change policies, and secure equal rights for all people. So to end the presentation portion of the program, I want you all to walk away with a few things. Know that the struggle for disability rights is ongoing, that it's important to know the history of those who came before, both locally and nationally. And it's our hope that the intersection of race and disability project brings greater awareness. I want to thank you for your attention today. Any questions? Yes. That was a great question. So that was actually Aurelia Carter, who's my mother. That's right. She asked how much time it took me to research the stories. And that's a great question. I can't tell you the exact amount right now. But each of them took, I would, if I had to try to quantify it, I mean, at least a month for each of them, at least a month, just to go back and really dig in to see if I was missing any information, to connect with people who may have had information on the individual figures of, for those who are no longer with us. But yeah, I would say probably about a month on each of them.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I guess. Going forward. Looking at any of them. I guess and having it all exam and how many children are adults in the other. I more black to keep the children out. It's actually less. I wonder if you see that this is just my observation.
That's a great question. So I will repeat the question again. So the question was, have we researched how many, was it specifically African-American children? How many African-American children were admitted into institutional care? We have not yet. However, this project is not over. We will be continuing to examine other potential subjects. Studies about individuals and institutions is on our list of potential subjects. We have a very large list, and I imagine that might come up in the next round. Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes. You did a fabulous job collecting these stories. Thank you very much for that. I'm curious about whether there's also an aspect of this project that's about kind of collecting stuff, photos and files, historical documents to really help the History Center build out the archive.
Yes. So the question was from Christy Troutman that if there's an aspect of this project that is about collecting materials for the archives. So yes, there is. We actually were lucky to get from the Moores one of Marika's helmets that she had to wear after her surgery, as well as a t-shirt from one of the fun runs and walks. And we have given them to the Heinz History Center for them to place in their repository. And yes, that was something that we asked of all of the people that we interviewed. And I'll be honest, a lot of people are kind of, they don't want to give away their stuff, right? So, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to, convince people to share that with us so we can make it available for everybody else. But yes, that was part of the project as well. Yes.
A huge endeavor, lots of opportunity here. Two questions.
Mhm.
One, you mentioned the long list of potential subjects. Any idea of the cadence of the next class? Question one. And question two is, how do we get these stories in front of young Black and brown kids throughout the region? I was talking earlier about, the legacy is in the future of the kids that are coming after all of us, right? So how do we use these testimonies, these stories to empower them and motivate them to let them know that the work is not done?
Those very good questions. And I may ask you to repeat the second question again, but I think I have it. So the first question, and I forgot it that quickly.
Cadence of the next inaugural of the
Yes.
next class.
The first question was, do we have an idea of the cadence of the next inaugural class? So I will be honest and say I do not, but I'm kind of looking at Tina Glabro, who, if you want to come up and speak again.
Funds from a different grant than the crisis grant.
Yeah, Tina's going to come up and share that answer.
Project has a second grant in addition to the FISA Foundation grant to continue the story collection and telling. And so we will be doing 7 more histories before the end of 2023.
Question two is about getting the story to Black and brown, not even Black and brown, but kids in general. Like, how do we take the information out there to the kids, the next generation of advocates and allies?
Okay, so question number 2 is, how do we get the stories out to the next generation of advocates and allies, and specifically younger audiences and younger kids? So what I would say is, of course, using our biggest tool, which is social media. That's the first step. Using that tool to be able to share those stories out. But what I would say is that anytime you're doing any kind of historical work, you have to make it relevant to that specific population. You have to make it relevant. You have to be able to convey to your audience about why they should care. So with that, I do think that there is room to do more stories on younger advocates. And I'm not talking about just current, I'm talking about past, present, yeah, not future, because we don't know that, but past and present advocates. And I think that would appeal more to younger audiences. All right, I'm going to take one virtual question. I'll come right back to you. Okay, so we do have a virtual question. And this is, we already kind of spoke on this. The question is, I mentioned that this is the inaugural class, what is planned for the subsequent classes, and Tina has already kind of spoken to that, basically that there is going to be 7 additional stories coming up, was it end of 2022? Yes, 23, I'm sorry, 2023. Okay, I'll come to you now and then I'll go back. Yes.
I was wondering. That would be a place, whether it's free and whether it's inherent, that all focus on Black leaders. I don't know if you think that, I'm not sure if that's all.
Yes, so the question was, had we looked at the Teenie Harris archives, or do we have a plan to work with the, look at the Teenie Harris archives photographs to see if Harris covered any of the leaders? So, no, I had not looked at his archive specifically for this project. I am familiar with it because I've used it for other projects. But I definitely think that would be worth checking out. And I do know that the Pittsburgh Courier does have an extensive, they have had extensive coverage of leaders in the disability community. And I know that's like probably more contemporary as opposed to the Teenie Harris archives. But I think that would definitely be something that we could explore for the next phase of the project. And I'd be happy to add that to our list. So thank you. Okay, I'm gonna check one more virtual question. Let's see, it says, can those who cannot access these events, like I have, how can they get this great information? I think our main method would be through the website and signing up for our mailing list on WPDHAC.org. I think that's probably the main mode of ways that they can access the information. We are working with trying to talk to media outlets to see if they can get these stories republished. So I'm hoping to hear something soon about that. And yes, right now, I think going to the website would be the best mode. Oh, we did.
Vehicles where we could possibly get information out about great work and all the people that you've interviewed. Thinking of Black History Month in February, the ADA celebration in July, Disability Awareness Month. Those are some pretty significant, well-publicized areas. We could probably share a lot of information that help people be educated about what this project is all about and all the good work that people like Florence and everyone else has done.
Yes, I totally agree. So this was more of a comment and suggestion that we have some additional vehicles that where we can share the information, such as Black History Month, ADA, repeat that. The ADA celebration, what was the third one? Disability and Disability Awareness Month. So yes, I totally agree that this could possibly be something that's revisited and highlighted again during those months and celebrations. Let's see. Yes.
In your research, did you ever address how people with disabilities are often treated the same way that people of color? For instance, we're in the balance way. We're often required to like the gentleman was winning back the bus. We have designated sitting areas are often forgotten. Is that something that
Yes, so the question was, in my research, did I address how people with disabilities are often treated like people of color as far as kind of having segregated accommodations? The closest that I got to that, I think, was Henry Bell. And that, of course, was during a time when that was status quo. But I imagine that as this work continues, we will encounter, a lot more of those stories and be able to share.
I'm going to ask one more question. How would that determine, right? As you know, I'm really about inclusion. All people with disabilities based on needs. Really, for this particular project,
category that's always reflective of all people with disabilities instead of a certain category. Because they should not have to, you know, it's sort of like a fight sometimes, as I've seen it, as a disability advocate. It's kind of like, depending on how many people, depending on the category of disability, this is what we talk about. This is where the funding goes. You know, we need to continue to create that equal platform for everybody. It's really about everybody. It's not for specific categories. So as you're continuing to work, you really be respectful and oriented and including various categories.
So just, you know how I have to, let's see if I can summarize your question. So you just want to make sure that we are going to cover different categories of disability going forward.
Critical and important. You know,
Yes.
whether a person is autism, whether a person is Down syndrome, whether a person is cerebral palsy. I could go down that long list, but it should be an even playing field that you're seeing everyone, every category, and not just some.
Yes, yes. So to answer your question, yes, the list that we have compiled has people from almost every category. So again, we're going to have, as this continues, we're going to have more stories showing different categories and different modes of advocacy. So just stay tuned. All right, thank you. All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you for that, Alana. And we're going to get ready to transition to our next part of the program, which will be a panelist discussion. As we get ready to bring all of our panelists up, please feel free to have some refreshments. Thank you.
Yeah.
Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for this panel discussion, Melva Fair. She's currently employed as the Chief Executive Officer of Community Living and Support Services, also known as CLASS. CLASS is celebrating 40 years of employment. I'm sorry, Melva is celebrating, Melva is celebrating 40 years of employment at CLASS since 1982. She has supported varying disability populations in the areas of residential, life skills, education, and vocational support. Thank you, Melva, for moderating this session.
Thank you, Tina, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here today in front of you to moderate this panel discussion on the intersection of race and disability. So this topic is so important, and the reason that is very important is because as people are marginalized, it's very important for us to understand our history, but more importantly, to understand all the contributions that people of all abilities and people, especially people of color, have made to the community. So I'm excited about the discussion that we're about to have today, and we want to thank Alonna again for all the wonderful research that she's done, all the wonderful work that she's done to bring this to light for us. I want to introduce our panels for today. I have my esteemed colleagues, many of these individuals I've worked with for many, many years. And so I want to start by introducing you to my left, Tina Calabro, who's a disability issues writer with the WPDHAC Steering Committee. I also want to introduce you again to Ms. Florence Reed, and you've heard her story and all the contributions that Florence has made, but mostly that she's the co-founder of Working Women with Disabilities, and she's also a member of my board, and so we're delighted to be celebrating and hearing her stories today. To my right, Chaz Kellum. A little ground rules. I'm going to be presenting some questions to our panelists, and I'm going to ask that each of the panelists take about 2 minutes to answer those questions, and then each of them will have that opportunity to respond to each question before we move on to the next question. And then from there, we will take questions from the audience and for the panel as well as for Alonna. Is Brian up?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, there you are, Brian. Okay, so this is Brian McKinney. He is the son of Marilyn McKinney and co-founder of Collective Wealth Partners. And so thank you all for participating on this panel. We appreciate your the time that you've given to this and the thoughts that you are going to be sharing with us through this panel discussion. So why don't we start? I'm going to start with asking if Tina, if she could share with us how this concept for the project originated and what was her role or the committee's role in developing the project.
Yes, like many of us here, including you, Melba, I'm a founding member of the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium, and I had the pleasure of serving as interim project director during 2021. And in that role, I had the opportunity to write the grant proposal for this project. So it just time-wise, the request for proposals came out, and so I was so thrilled to be able to get involved and to write that proposal. The consortium, as you've heard, was founded in 2015. Our mission is to preserve and honor the historic struggle of people with disabilities to attain human and civil rights and to share the lived experiences of today in order to promote community access, participation, and equal opportunity. In short, our work is to use disability history to advance disability rights. And as was already mentioned today, our key partners in this work are Achieva, the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, and the Heinz History Center. Now, as many as you know, Western Pennsylvania has a very strong history of advocacy for disability rights. Those of us that are in the community know this, and yet this struggle has not been much in the public record or the historic record for scholars. And it's the fight for disability rights has only been recently, in recent years, been recognized as a part of American history. So our organization got together in 2015 to address this need. Especially unrecognized and underrepresented is the history of people of color who have disabilities. This omission has come to light as our nation grapples with deep levels of racial inequality, and everything has come up to the surface, and the work of FISA to educate people about the intersection of race and disability was very timely on that. Through the grant from the FISA Foundation, the consortium became aware of local and national activists who were bringing attention to the historical and contemporary issues of people of color with disabilities whose stories were being told for the first time. So FISA did a lot of educating of our community and brought a lot of activists to our attention to hear their thoughts and to think about things that we had never thought about. They pointed to themes that emerged from race and disability research, the remarkable leadership that has existed in that community, the trajectory of dehumanization, the story of that, the stigma that people have endured, the disability as a result of over-policing and violence, and the high rate of unemployment among people of color who have disabilities. And that's just to name a few of the themes that were brought to our attention. These activists informed us not only of the absence of the story of people in the historic narrative, but also within the contemporary disability rights movement. And this perception has been captured, as Alonna said, in the hashtag #DisabilityTooWhite, hashtag #DisabilityTooWhite, which, as we looked at our own Western PA Disability History and Action Consortium, had to reflect that on ourselves. Are we disability too white in our endeavor? So we can't thank FISA enough for bringing all of this to our attention. The other aspect that we were made aware of is that although the fight for disability rights fits under the big umbrella of social justice, that many social justice efforts have viewed disability rights as being outside of the work that they do. And likewise, that people of color who have disabilities have sometimes been left out of social justice efforts that concern people of color. So this was another concept that we brought into our grant proposal for this project. We realized as a consortium that we needed to actively address the intersection of race and disability. in the historic record and within the contemporary social justice conversation. So we received the grant from FISA to engage a historian to lead the project. Alonna Carter rose to the top of the list as someone with a great deal of knowledge, skill, and personal experience with disability. As Alonna said also, the history selected for the project, whether it's this year's project or the continuation of the project, represent different types of disabilities, past eras of disability services, including institutionalization that was brought up here today, pivotal disability rights movements, and seminal leadership. The starting point for this work was the small number of stories and historical materials that we had already gathered, whether it was gathered through the consortium or through Heinz History Center or other repositories. The Community Advisory Committee, which was comprised of people with a strong interest in the intersection of race and disability, provided a voice in guiding research, documentation, as well as communications and community engagement. I look at Chaz when I say that. And Alonna is continuing this work. We also, the consortium, have engaged another preservation scholar, Heather Cowie, to continue this work through the second grant that we've received. And both Alonna and Heather are expanding the list of subjects and topics for exploration. So we want to thank the FISA Foundation, Alonna Carter, the advisory committee, and all of the remarkable people who are the subjects of these stories, including you, Florence. And because of this, the consortium has been able to take a visible role in this work. And as with all of our projects, we are adding these Western Pennsylvania stories to the statewide and national narrative. And one of the ways we do this is to stay connected to plans underway for a National Museum of Disability Rights in Washington, D.C. So thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Tina has been really instrumental in helping to communicate all the good work that the consortium has done. But one thing Tina mentioned is about, the fact that disability doesn't always get recognized as a part of an inclusive community. And I think that's very important. So I'm going to ask the panelists, and we're going to start with you, Brian, because I don't want to forget you back there. In your opinion, why was this project so important to you? And we're going to take 2 minutes from each of the panelists.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. I think for me, this project is important because we have all these kind of community activists, of which I consider my mother to be one of, that are kind of working behind the scenes, doing the work not for the glory, but for the betterment of the community. And I think a lot of times that work goes unnoted. It goes kind of unpublicized. And these folks that were honored today, and the folks that are doing the work today, that will be honored in the future, they're not doing it for the accolades. They're doing it because they care. They're doing it because they know if they don't do it, who else is going to? And it's very personal for them. And so for me, having the opportunity to take part in a program, research, that you all are doing, particularly Alonna, to highlight these remarkable individuals. I mean, it is inspiring for me, and I've talked about them with my kids as well. And so, just to have the opportunity to someone to do the work to put these folks on the pedestal that they deserve to be on, for doing the hard work for the most vulnerable. Some of the most vulnerable folks in the community, particularly students and kids that we know have disproportionate experiences in education. To me, it's that important, and I'm glad to hear that it's something that will continue going forward.
Thank you. Guys, want to comment?
Yeah, I've been involved for 50 years in this work, and so it's all been about consciousness raising. So as a young guy, I didn't know anything about disability, and then I got to work in an institution for a little bit, and so the horrors that took place for people with disabilities. But for years and years, I didn't look at race as being part of that. I didn't understand. That's almost like a double whammy, you know. And when you add gender to that or sexual persuasion to that, it's even a bigger double whammy, it's a triple, quadruple whammy that happens. But to me, this is so important because it's raising consciousness, and change doesn't occur unless you raise consciousness. And you can't raise consciousness without having the stories. So these are, I'm excited to be part of this, to hear the stories. I'm looking forward to the additional stories. And the other piece that I think I hope we look at is that oftentimes the very people who do the support of people with disabilities are people of color. And we haven't even touched upon that yet and what that story is going to be like, which I think is a very interesting story that we've not touched. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Chaz, comments?
Great question. Glad to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Couple of things I would say. I'm living proof that this matters, right? I'm a Pittsburgher. You know all of what that means, but I'm living proof that this matters. Representation matters, right? Representation matters. And as we focus on the future generations of this continued movement, right? Because as it's been pointed out, this work is far from over, right? We need to continue to think about how the movement continues, and future generations, representation will continue to matter. And this is our history, right? This is part of our history. And I hope that we can continue to ingrain it into the history of the disability movement overall, right? So how can we not only continue to pinpoint it, highlight it, talk about it frequently, but talk about it as integrated into the movement and the history of the disability community as a whole, right? Oftentimes, as we think about the history we were taught in our school years, right? There were things left off those lessons, right? And I hope that in the future that this history and these pioneers are part of the overall history and part of the overall movement. And while it's great that we have this focus, I'm often wondering how we make it integrated into the overall movement.
Thank you, Chaz. Florence, do you have any comments on that one?
The only thing I really want people to realize is it's never over. It will never be over for people with disability, for people with color. It will never be over. And if you ever get to a position where you think it's over, that's where things get overtaken. Yeah, because you think that everything, you get to a place where you're complacent. Well, I had this, I didn't have it before, and things are a lot better. But things are not better. They're going to get worse if you don't stand up and do what you do now. Things are only going to get worse. It's up to you. The other African Americans coming after me or the other ones, you have to stand up. You cannot lay down on the job. Yeah, because it will never be over. And if you lay down on the job, that's why, what do they say about the devil? If you let him get one little toe in the door, he comes all the way in. Yeah, that's what other people are. If you let them get one toe in the door on you, they would just take over.
Thank you, Florence. And it's important that we continue to advocate because we want people to see individuals with disabilities, regardless of your skin color, regardless of what your abilities are as citizens, as people first versus disability or any particular race or color. So Florence, I'm going to start with you with this question. Not only do we, for people with people of color living with disabilities does it present challenges? As the founder of Working Women with Disability, can you share some comments specifically on gender and disability issues?
Well, as Alonna was talking, I remember something that was in the back of my mind that I had forgotten. I have not always been disabled. I was working in education as a speech therapist, and I was moving up the ladder. And as I became disabled, I slowly realized that when you become disabled, people don't think of you as African American anymore. They don't even think of you as a woman. They put you in the category where you have no sex, you have no gender, and it's just that I learned that you have to fight back. You know, and I never let people take for granted just because I had this well, you can do whatever you want to me. And yeah, and I might not have always hollered at people and got my way, but I got my way. You know, I slowly worked my way in and I got my way. I learned how to not argue with people, but when I said something, people listened. And they usually did what I said do. And it was because of the way that you have to go in as an African American, as a woman. You cannot let things overtake you, and you cannot go in fussy. You have to go in nice and quiet, and then you get your way. Yeah, but you know, when you cannot let anything get you so down, you know, because you will always be an African American and you will always be a woman, no matter what. And so therefore you have to keep fighting and working on those things and getting your way. And I think if Guy Caruso or anyone here knows me, yeah, I got to the point where people listen to what I said. I never argue with people, but I worked my way in, and they listened to what I said.
Thank you for it. And so Tina, you are a parent of a son with a disability. And do you have any reflections on this particular question as a parent?
You know, one of the things that comes to mind with my son, he's a member of the LGBTQIA plus community. And so I always see him in regard to that intersection of he's just a person. He's 27 years old. He's a person with a disability, a significant disability that he has to cope with every single day and work so hard to make his way every day. He also is a member of the LGBT community as well. And so I just think as a parent, you know, like for all of us parents, we support our children for who they are. And we look at the community around us. How is that community functioning? And then as much as possible, we put our effort into changing that community to make it better for our children and others. And we also try to make our children advocates and believe in their self-determination to make those changes that they need to make as well in the community.
Thank you, Tina. And so Chaz, as an African-American man, professional businessman, working in the field and living with a disability, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I don't think we talk about the intersection of disability with anything else. You get pigeonholed, put into this box, and you spend all your energy and effort trying to fight to get out the box. When it comes to professional work, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to relationship, I mean, you're just everything we do, we get pigeonholed and put into this box of being a person with a disability, and that's exhausting. And when you add in another marginalized community into that, whether it's LGBTQIA plus or a person of color, it adds another layer. And personally, I found it very difficult to fit in any of those boxes. I'm not disabled enough. I'm not Black enough. I'm not this enough. And that also presents challenges trying to navigate communities overall. So again, it's exhausting. It's also, not just our job to continue this conversation in this movement, right? So we need allies and advocates, and no movement in history happened in isolation, right? Civil rights movement had white brothers and sisters right next to us, and this next movement we're on, when you talk about race and then an intersection of race and disability, is going to require the same sort of camaraderie and effort in order to make it part of the everyday movement. So, I keep showing up. I keep showing up authentically, intentionally, and to use what Florence said, I don't remain quiet, right? And we have to just keep showing up to the best of our ability, keep trying to demonstrate our place. But the community is different than it was. We're more educated now than we've ever been. We're more dedicated. We're more community engaged. We're more community aware. We're part of our community. And I think, we're really, as a movement, finding our place and building our place in this space.
Well said, Jazz. So let's start with Dr. Caruso, guys. I'm sure some of you work in the field and probably work beside people of color with disabilities or may not. Have you observed any of the kinds of things that we're describing at this platform in your place of work? Or in the community, or any of your circles?
Well, so I think there's been a lot of consciousness raising, and talk is cheap, action is harder. Okay, so I think we're sort of between that talk and action piece, and I think the Visa Foundation's struggling with that question. How do we move beyond talking about it to really doing things that make a difference? So I know at the state level, at the Office of Developmental Programs, they have a planning committee. And one of the things they've taken on is racial diversity, and knowing that they have a hell of a long way to go. So they're just starting to do the groundwork, which I think the Visa Foundation equally has done. It's trying to getting the data, just getting a sense of where are we at so that we can then move forward. So I think this has become a question that is getting beyond just talk, and people are starting to look at what can you do about it. We have a long way to go. I think as individuals, I have a long way to go in my own learning curve. And part of that is trying to listen more. Yeah, oftentimes at the table, white guys like to talk and take over. And I think we got to, for me personally, I got to sit back and listen more.
And the challenge, I think, for all of us is how do we level the playing field? Brian, do you have any comments on that particular question?
Is that me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think, I run an investment firm now, and I'm based in Denver. Prior to doing that, I did a master's program where I worked at Denver Public Schools for a couple of years. And when you look at the data in terms of how students are doing, Black students out here, which like most places around the country are doing, are doing the worst, except for students with special needs, right? They're actually doing the worst in these districts. And then when you combine the two, Black students with special needs, you see, it's heartbreaking, actually, when you look at the data. You look at the neglect of some of these students, and and you see how it's not a priority, or there's no sense of urgency. And so, what I've taken as my role is just to be, an advocate, advocating for Black students, but also advocating for standing in the space for that intersectionality, because I think that for those students, for those parents, it's hard. As Chaz said, it's exhausting. So we talk about leveling the playing field. The way to level the playing field, I think, or start to level the playing field for, we have to start early. So it's advocating aggressively for those students that are in that intersection, because we know that if that is not addressed early on, it leads to a whole host of issues later on down the line, when those students enter society as adults, right? And so we cannot level the playing field unless we start early, unless we start advocating for those students that are often neglected, for those families that are often so frustrated and so stressed that they need help, they need support. And so that's how I think we start delaying the playing field, is by starting early, because if not, the results are devastating.
Thank you, Brian. And even with, Alonna talked about the ADA, the idea that's all been implemented to help open the doors for people with disabilities, especially people with colors, and level the playing field. But we still have challenges around that. We still have a lot of work to make sure that that happens. Tina, can you just kind of talk a little bit about, what has been like your efforts to try to, knowing that those two legislations that were passed, especially when Mark was in school, how did that help you get the inclusive education that he wanted and needed, and in order to do well in the community?
And Brian, I have to recognize your mother, Marilyn McKinney, and others in the Pittsburgh Public Schools for the terrific education that my son received in inclusive classrooms, from kindergarten through 12th grade, and then through the City Connections program through 21, and also then making the transition to employment. And he has 2 jobs, and they're both very fulfilling for him. And so his education, his degree from Community College of Allegheny County, everything has played out exactly the way IDEA and the ADA would like to see it play out. And so that's been good, but that's not the case for every person, even today. We know that. It still takes a great deal of advocacy. It takes a lot of networking. I look at different people in the audience, and I know that my son Mark would not have the education he really wanted if it weren't for Aurelia Carter and other people in this room and on this webinar who made sure that everything was in place. I think that nowadays what it is the laws are there and people know them, but are they implemented? Is it systemic? And we're still fighting those battles. And we, just like Lauren said, it's not over. We have to keep doing it because it's not embedded in the society.
And Chas, do you have any comment on those legislations? And
Yeah, I think, both helpful. A law is only a law on a piece of paper, right? Execution is so important. And I challenge, all the organizations I'm a part of to go above and beyond, right? How do we build from and design from an inclusive culture, right? A universal design approach, right? When you're writing your bylaws or your board of directors rules, are you writing them with inclusive language? As you build buildings, are you building them with inclusion design from the beginning, right? The law is going to tell you one thing, but to put into practice is a whole nother level of execution. It takes, again, intentional, thoughtful action in order for those things to move forward. And I'm grateful that I grew up in an era where they were present, and I acknowledge that, right? That I grew up in an era when they were around. But we still have some adjustments and shifts to make to help educate people about them, and to how do we continue to push forward past them.
thank you. And so one final question, and I'm going to give this one to Guy. And what's next? Where do you see something like this going? And all the effort that Alonna has done and FISA has graciously supported it. What's next for heightening awareness? And I say that because Guy has also been very instrumental in training our first responders along his career and trying to do a lot of work to advocate for equality. Guy?
Well, I think what's next is that we have to be in it for the long haul. I think, Florence mentioned that, everybody's mentioned that, and parents have to be ever so vigilant, because laws, as Chas indicated, are laws. They don't mean that things change. They give you a possibility, an opportunity, but the change happens from individual action. And So a lot of this is each of us has to ask ourselves, where do I fit? You know, what's my role in this? How do I become more knowledgeable about other people's histories and backgrounds? Because a lot of this I haven't known. I mean, it's so it's vigilance, it's creating awareness. It's based on our values, our personal values, what we're going to do. And you can't sit on the sidelines. You got to get into the fray. You got to be part of things. And I think one of the important things, and Chaz, you've been doing this, is sitting on boards. I think people of color, I think people of disabilities need to be not tokens on boards, but really actively sitting at boards where decisions get made and changes happen in our society on all sorts of levels. So again, the history helps us to understand this. I also think that so much of the disability history right now has been driven by the hard work of the civil rights movement. That was integrated in many ways, but we've got a good history to draw on, but we've got to write history now for the future of what it's going to be. And that's going to take some continued vigilance and work, and the work that Alonna has done, the funding from the Visa Foundation, the continued efforts we're trying to do as a consortium. We're just at the starting gate for a lot of this stuff. So we got to be in it for the long haul.
Thank you. So we are going to shift a little bit and open the questions up from the audience and from our virtual friends. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask the panel, and Alonna, I don't know if do we have another seat? If you want to, well, Alonna is sitting in front, so I can certainly direct any questions to her if you have questions for her. But I want to give everyone in the audience an opportunity to ask more questions, because I think all the work that has been done here is great, and I want us to continue to help come up with ideas and solutions that can help this project move forward, because it's so important. Any questions from the audience?
So while everybody's thinking of questions, I just wanted to acknowledge sign language interpreter has done an amazing job. All the folks behind the scenes with technology. I just, a lot of folks put together this event. I know folks are up here, but a lot of people behind the scenes got us to this point and will be needed as we continue to move forward. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all the folks behind the scenes.
Thank you. So I have one question for Alonna, and the question is, how can I get to tell my story?
That is an excellent question. So we encourage you to reach out to the WPDHAC. Go to the website, www.wpdhac.org, and send a message, and we'd be happy to add you to a list of our subjects.
Wonderful. The more people that we have that we can tell that story and help change the perceptions, that would be wonderful. Any other questions? Yes.
First of all, I wanted to thank all of you so much for such an engaging program today. And I'm struck by something that someone who's from advocacy groups told me years ago, which is that any one of us can become a part of the disability community.
Absolutely.
And so I want to know, and you've talked about this already, but for us that want to be allies to your work, what more can we do to help you?
The question is, any of us can become disabled at any moment, and what more can people do to be allies to the work that's being done? Was that a question for me, or anyone? It's for anyone who's able to take it.
Brian, any thoughts?
Most of my comments will relate, specific to education. What I would love to see is for folks like somebody said, take a stand. You have to make your voice. It feels isolating when it's only a few advocates, and we're kind of in the middle of it, and we are trying to stand in a gap for everyone. So how to be allies is to use your voice for good, right? Use your voice to bring in other voices, because it makes a huge difference when it's 3 to 4 people, when it's 30 to 40 people, right? And so, for me, I'm constantly having people try to come to board meetings and speak, because I'm out there every month speaking at board meetings, speaking for underserved students in our public school district. And so when I have support, when I have other families kind of talking about their experiences, It makes a huge difference on the school board, on the superintendent, and on the community to know that it's more than just a few people. And it also gives me energy to continue to go out there and fight the good fight.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments?
Just a comment I would have to that is if you're in a position to hire people with disabilities. If they have the skill sets you need for the jobs to get done, not token again, but hire people. If you're a landlord and you get property to rent property to people who might have a disability. So some of it is, the actions are the doing of what you would do for anybody else. Disability, you're right, it's an equal opportunity club. You can join on any given day. Thank you, Ed Roberts, for saying that. We're all going to be disabled at some point in time. Some of us have family members already who are disabled. To take that sort of experience, which can be an aha moment, to say, what can you do? Sit on boards. Again, be a voice for people with disabilities, people of color, as best you can. But it's a great question. Money is always welcome. You want to make contributions to various organizations.
I mean, if you're offering.
Yeah, so all those sort of things. But it's you can't sit on the sidelines. I think that's the question. What can we do to make a difference? And each one of us can only. Some of us are great on board. Some of us are great at social gatherings. We all have different roles to play, but it's get a role and play it.
I would just add quickly, like we all, disability or not, have to give ourselves a little bit of grace, right? Like this is tough. I mean, this is tough stuff. So giving yourself and others a little bit of grace is so important. So, for none of us, we shouldn't be carrying the load or feel like we have to carry the load completely on our own, right? FISA Foundation, great, but they shouldn't be the only foundation in this community supporting this type of work, right? So giving ourselves and others a little bit of grace, I think is almost a little bit of a lost art, right? Right now we're so wound so tight that people are afraid to make a mistake, right? So giving each other a little bit of grace is there are millions of things in the world, folks, that we don't know, right? Disability etiquette, this language. I mean, so allowing a little bit of grace, I think is vital.
Yeah, and I was going to mention language, especially, and moving towards dispelling any myths or stereotypes that people might have about people of color with disabilities, period. Changing those perceptions about what people bring to the table is really important. Any other questions? Yes, Susan. And I think one of the things that you do is if you're adding value like that, we want to be clear and make sure that any kind of work that effort that has this tool. So there's no reason it has to be a separate effort. I think it's getting, it's allowing and asking and including people. I remember when I was younger now, the next organization, that there was a lot of problems because women in color really felt huge. And I think that's kind of where we should learn from, being able to join all working together. That would be my suggestion. And I'm just going to paraphrase that, Susan. I think that Susan's point, just so that people from the virtual world can hear, is that if there's opportunities to have gatherings or whatever, to make sure that they're inclusive, that they're accessible, that we pay attention to all those benchmarks that will make it easy for people to be a part of the community. Aurelia?
Yeah, I really have a comment. Excuse me, for once I don't have a question, right? So first of all, I wanted to say to Brian, your mom was my girl, so I wanted to make sure I get a shout out. If it was not for her, my son, me with Maryland and Maryland working with me when they told me that he could not go to a regular school. He had to go to Conroy. I said, he ain't going. If it was not for working with her and her working with me, my son would be where he is today, her and Kate Couple. So I definitely want to shout you out. I can see your mom looking at you. You got those eyes, I'm telling you. And I want to make sure that I say to you that
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
we did not understand the sacrifices she actually made trying to help us to get our kids to where they needed to be, where they should have been, in their community, in regular schools with everybody else. I thank her to the bottom of my heart. And I'm glad I had the opportunity. I haven't had a chance to meet you in person, but I was definitely going to shout her out, and you too. You know what I mean? Because again, with her being a Black woman, being an educator, trying to do the right thing, and not understanding what her struggles may have been, which we did not know at that time. But at the same token, she made sacrifices in order to help children like my son, who was a young Black kid, who they said would never be able to do anything. So I wanted to make sure I gave that comment to you personally, and just to shout you out, because it really made my day to be able to know you were on this panel, and actually with my daughter. You both were a part of the same struggle, and you didn't even know.
Thank you, Aurelia.
Thank you so much.
One more question? Yes, sir.
Thank you for a great panel, great forum. Toward the question that has been asked and talked about this afternoon, one is how to get greater support. There, as you all know, most of Americans are either unaware or on the fringe of supporting these types of issues. How do you, first of all, how do you define accessibility, disability, and so forth? I went to the website, I couldn't find a definition. So if I was someone who was unaware, I need to be educated. Best place, as Alonna pointed out, to go to the website. So that's one of the two sessions I would have. And then once you understand what is defined as a disability, what is defined as accessibility, and so forth, then people will probably have a better opportunity to see how they can best support and be involved.
So the question is, paraphrasing again, how do you access the information, especially if you're unaware or don't have any experience with people with disabilities? And I'm going to turn that to the panel to respond to.
I can respond to that. Every organization should have resources. Every organization, not just disability organizations, should have resources about terminology, access, inclusion, sort of a how-to. How do you include people in a meeting? How do you get a sign language interpreter? How is your physical access? All of that. So every organization, every company should have that information available to people.
I love the idea, though, of finding it on this website. I think that's a very good suggestion. I also would say it's a moving target, right? Like, not every person that uses a wheelchair wants or needs the same thing. Not every person with autism wants or needs the same thing. So it's a moving target. So I think and I think this is the same for every community of sort, right? Not every, cisgender white male wants the same things or wants the same supports. So it's a moving target, but I do believe that there are some baselines, some level setting expectations that companies, institutions, colleges, nonprofits should have when it comes to communication access, disability etiquette, and really taking a close examination of their policies and programs, protocols, things of that nature, to make sure that they're written with an inclusive approach. But I think those are some good suggestions to be included as we educate the, I don't want to call them non-members of the community, but those that may not be as ingrained into this work. Well said.
Yes, I don't want to ignore your question, and then I'll turn it over to Alonna.
Does the panel have any recommendations of websites like the ADA website, like Title II, like if somebody was going to have a meeting or something, there would be a recommendation there, or like if you have this, like the JAN website, like for accommodations.
I mean, my gut reaction would be FISA has a list of resources. I don't think there's necessarily one collective place. I think, Temple University, I think I would use the organizations which you've seen reflected today as a starting place to go to their sites. And from those sites, whether it be class, whether it be, I would go to those resources, which will then hopefully catapult you into some of those national services and resources.
And of course, there's always the Centers for Independent Living. There's, like I said, Temple's Institute on Disability, the link. There's all kinds of places that you can get that kind of information. So thank you all for your questions. Thank you for allowing me to be your moderator today. And I'm going to turn it over to Alonna for closing remarks.
So I just want to thank everyone again for attending today in person, virtually. I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank our moderator, Melba Fair. And I would like to also thank our partners in the Heinz History Center, FISA, Achieva, and everyone that came together to collaborate with us on this event. And a very special thank you to Dania Childress and Ann Mataris for helping with this event. We couldn't have done it without you. And we look forward to sharing more of these stories with you. Again, please do go out to the website, check out the 3 stories that have been already published. Florence Reed, Henry Bell, Rika's Hearts. And we look forward to hearing from you about the program and reaching out to us to get involved if you'd like. Have a great day.